Al Jazeera Podcasts.
Today, Donald Trump ushers in a new era of protectionism.
Our country and its taxpayers have been ripped off for more than 50 years, but it is not going to happen anymore.
From China to Cambodia, how the U.S. is sweeping new tariffs are reshaping global trade and raising prices at home. I'm Kevin Hirten, and this is The Take.
There are no words to describe how unprecedented this is, both in terms of scale, like how many countries are impacted, how high these tariffs are, but also the way it was rolled out, right? Like on a Tuesday, sort of nobody knew what to expect, with the president of the US standing with this giant prop.
I think you can, for the most part, see it. Those with good eyes, with bad eyes. We didn't want to it's very windy out here. We didn't want to bring out the big charts because it had no chance of standing.
I'm glad it happened on April 2nd. Not April 1st, because it would have felt like a joke.
Yeah, history wouldn't have believed it wasn't a giant April Fool's joke.
My name is Vina Nadjibulla. I'm the Vice President of Research and Strategy at the Asia Pacific Foundation of Canada, and I'm joining you from sunny Vancouver.
All right. Well, Vina, I should say this happens to be my last episode guest hosting full time on this show, and my first day was Inauguration Day, and now we're speaking in the wake of Liberation Day.
Wow.
Which is what the White House called this tariff rollout. So that's 74 days. And as of Friday, I feel like I've aged 5 years.
Yeah. It's like dog years, basically. We're all living in that kind of sense of time, right? Where every day is 10 days or 10 years.
I know. And hosting a daily news podcast, just imagine. But so far in the aftermath of Liberation Day, it seems to be liberating investors from trillions of dollars worth of wealth.
An exceptionally brutal day on Wall Street. President Trump's tariffs sparking a huge sell-off today, sending all three major markets plunging. The trading day there, you're hearing the bell ringing. It's
Thursday, the Dow had its fifth worst day in history, falling more than 1,600 points. As of Friday morning, when we're talking, it's down another 1,000. So give us a refresher as to what sparked all the panic. What did Trump announce, and how does it escalate the trade policies that this administration had already put in place?
Yeah, so President Trump announced sweeping tariffs, basically 10% on everyone, so kind of a baseline minimum of 10% on all goods coming into the U.S., and then specific what he called reciprocal tariffs that go up to 49% on a country like Cambodia on about 60 other countries. So you have to understand that the U.S. is the biggest consumer market, right? Americans buy a lot of stuff. And basically President Trump said, we're closed for business. That's essentially sort of what these tariffs mean. And this will be hugely devastating to, obviously, the U.S. economy, but also economies around the world. So it's the largest trade war in modern history. It will have implications on everything and how we buy stuff, how we make stuff, employment, inflation, all of those things. And it basically tries to remake about 80 years of global trade policy that U.S. led. I mean, U.S. basically put in place all these systems, and the way we trade, kind of globalization, U.S.-led globalization. Well, this is a direct attack on that.
Yeah, Trump seems to be particularly focused on trade imbalances.
Yes.
What are we learning about how they calculated the numbers for these reciprocal tariffs?
Yeah, so normally when countries do these things, when they talk about reciprocal tariffs, it's a really complicated formula where they look at the other country's tariffs, when they look at non-tariff barriers, kind of like regulations, ways in which they distort and make trade unfair. In the case of President Trump, he basically looked at one number, the deficit. So if America buys more from a country than we sell to them, he finds that to be a problem. He thinks deficits are bad, and he wants to make that more fair. So in his view, if we buy more from you than we sell you, that's unfair to us. And therefore, we need to put a tariff on you so that we can make trade more balanced. So the formula that they used, they basically looked at the bilateral trade deficit. Then they divided it by the size of U.S. imports, and then they divided that again by 2. Now, so this is a random formula. I mean, we've kind of reverse engineered it.
Yeah, no one's ever done this before.
Well, they
Actually,
did.
Is there some think maybe AI had something to do with this?
That is the speculation, certainly. I mean, but whether it was AI or human calculated, the formula itself is random, right? Like that's not how tariffs get calculated. So if they used AI, Kevin, for efficiency, God bless. But the point is, this is completely absurd in terms of a way to determine tariffs.
So some of these tariffs are extremely high. 54% on Chinese goods, 20% on stuff from Europe. There's even a 10% reciprocal tariff on a few uninhabited sub-Antarctic islands that only have animals. So try to put this in practical terms for me. Say after this interview, I go out, I try to buy a flat screen TV, a bottle of Pinot Grigio, and a penguin. Will I already feel an effect?
Yeah, so I mean, I think it's incredible that some uninhabited islands have also made the list. I think that's just to kind of show that nowhere in the world is safe. Even the penguins will feel the impact of these tariffs. But in all seriousness, though, what this means is that most of the things that Americans buy will be expensive. Now, Kevin, it will take some time. Things don't kind of trickle down right away. So like today, if you go to Walmart and try to buy sneakers or a T-shirt from Vietnam, the prices won't immediately seem higher because it will take some time. So maybe a few weeks even. But in the long term, like 3-4 months down the road, especially by the time summer rolls around, everything will be more expensive. So Americans get all of their apparel, shoes, electronics, iPhones, everything from Asian markets. China is kind of the factory of the world, right? It manufactures 35% of all things manufactured in the world. A lot of other places like Vietnam, Cambodia, who are really hit by these tariffs, they're also doing a lot of this manufacturing of kind of everyday consumer goods, right? So all the stuff that we buy, they will be higher in price. And then finally, a lot of agricultural products, because America still brings in a lot of agricultural, so groceries will also be more expensive.
So say we give the White House the benefit of the doubt. As best you can tell, what is Trump actually trying to achieve from these tariffs? What's the most generous interpretation of the actions here?
Yeah, so if one is to take him at his word, or more people around him who have done a little bit more explaining of what the strategy behind all of this is, it's about raising money, essentially. So they're saying that this is a tax on foreigners. So they're arguing that it's foreigners who will pay this tariff. Now, most economists, I must say, disagree with this interpretation. They believe that it will be American consumers who will pay a higher price. Mm-hmm. But if we were to believe their scenario, so it's to raise money, about $800 billion, they say, and to bring manufacturing back to the U.S. So to onshore manufacturing, to create jobs in the U.S. Those are the two main reasons. Now, again, people very much disagree whether the strategy will work and whether it will bring more money, reduce American deficit, and bring more jobs to the U.S.
And the other thing is, I don't want to let any of these conversations go without reminding people why tariffs are seen as so regressive. Can you tell me why they're regressive?
Yeah, so because, again, for the last 100 years, we've been living in a world in which we've tried to reduce tariffs and reduce barriers to trade under the assumption that if we essentially sell with each other more, that brings down prices. So we've seen this. Every American has seen that, how in the last 30 years, things have gotten cheaper. There has been a lot more choice when you go to a store. You get a lot more options. That competition then spurs innovation. So productivity goes higher. Businesses have to be more efficient, more competitive. So that essentially brings growth for most people. Now, I have to say there are also losers in free trade. Places where, like certainly Rust Belt, Middle America, right, that lost some of the jobs because they went overseas. So there are those losers. But on balance, everyone around the world has benefited from lower barriers to trade, more commerce, more exchange. Now, in order to have kind of dealt with some of the negative impacts of trade, there were other policies that could be introduced, right? Supporting businesses who've lost jobs, or kind of basically retooling businesses and so forth. What's being proposed is not the solution to even the parts of globalization and free trade that haven't worked.
So the reason we're saying this is regressive, this is like reverse Robin Hood, right?
Yes.
Because the people who go to Walmart, who buy goods from China, they will pay more. And this is being done to offset a huge tax cut that will benefit the wealthy.
Absolutely. So President Trump basically wants to kind of restructure taxation in the U.S. The benefits of that will be to the ones who are wealthier. So as you say, people who make more money, yes, their taxes will go down. But the cost will be on people who spend most of their paycheck on consumer goods. So lower income Americans will actually end up hurt by these policies, which is the opposite of what the president says, and certainly not what millions of Americans who voted for him obviously do not want to pay more for their basic daily goods.
More with Vina after the break. Okay, so Vina, your area of expertise is Asia. So let's drill down on how this is being received on the other side. So we have seen some significant retaliatory tariffs from China.
China has announced additional tariffs targeting the United States, and this is a response to the global tariffs. President Donald Trump announced that on Wednesday, and Beijing is now saying it will impose tariffs of 34% on all U.S. goods.
But then we also have countries like Vietnam, Cambodia, and Laos, which are seemingly just caught in the crossfire here. Trump sees them as being part of China's extended supply chain. Cambodia and Laos are two of the poorest countries in the region, but Trump says Cambodia has, quote, made a fortune off of the U.S.
Look at Cambodia, 97%. We're going to bring it down to 49. They made a fortune with the United States of America.
I mean, these are developing economies he's talking about. How in the world is the U.S. a victim of Cambodia? Isn't it the other way around?
Yeah, so you're absolutely right that Asia is probably the hardest hit by these tariffs, particularly Southeast Asia. So the countries like Cambodia, Vietnam, Laos, Malaysia, they are now faced with tariffs that are close to 50%, so 49, 48, 46%, numbers that would be just crippling to their economies. You have to realize this has happened because they have large surpluses. So they do sell a lot more to America. So for instance, Vietnam sells like $146 billion worth of goods, partly because they manufacture those things. And this happened, Kevin, ironically, because during Trump's first administration, he put in a lot of tariffs and restrictions on China, right? So China used to sell a lot of stuff to the U.S. A lot of these consumer low-level technology goods from China were coming to the U.S. With those tariffs then, both Chinese companies as well as American companies like Apple and others moved to Vietnam, moved to Malaysia to basically diversify supply chains to a strategy known as China Plus One. So this all came because of Trump's first presidency and policies. Now, those same countries and same companies who basically did what they thought was the desired policy of diversifying and de-risking from China are very much going to pay the price because now they have higher surpluses with the U.S. And these tariffs now will make them essentially reconsider doing business in those countries. So American companies who are located in Vietnam, in Cambodia, and other places will have to figure out where to go next.
And I guess the theory would be like Trump hopes that they come to the United States. The question is that feasible? Can you even come close to the same price points in the U.S.?
Yes. So President Trump says basically bring everything back to the U.S. And the answer to that is no, it's not feasible, certainly not feasible in the next 5 years, not even 10 years. And then there's costs, right? There are reasons why these companies went elsewhere, both in terms of availability of raw materials and inputs, as well as labor. So kind of the economies of scale, all of that. Asia will be hit because Asia is where a lot of the stuff that Americans use and buy are now made. And those governments face some really difficult choices. With the exception of China, none of the other countries in the region have announced any countermeasures or any retaliation. In fact, most countries, and certainly our kind of allies and friends like Japan, South Korea, Philippines, Taiwan, they all want to negotiate. They're basically shocked and disappointed, but they still want to talk to the Trump administration and find a way out of this.
Okay, let's talk about U.S.'s Asian allies. The trade ministers of China, South Korea, and Japan met up in Seoul to talk about deepening cooperation.
The meeting was seen as a strategic move to coordinate a response with all three nations facing similar concerns as major U.S. trade deficit partners and potential targets of tariffs.
Now, this is for the first time since Trump left office in 2020. There's this photo of them that's been making the rounds because these are three countries that have been at odds for years over everything from territorial disputes to historical grievances. We don't have to get into all that. But I guess just how surprising is this to you to see them coming together like this quickly? Are these tariffs alienating traditional allies like Japan and South Korea, and will it push them closer to China?
So, yes, it was significant that Japan, Korea, and China met. I think certainly China will very much try to peel these allies away from the US and essentially divide and conquer. But we have to be cautious in kind of overemphasizing what happened, because certainly for a country like Japan, they have serious concerns with respect to China when it comes to national security, and they have lots of disputes, as you mentioned. So especially Japan will be cautious about over-reliance and getting too close to China. But South Korea, I think it's a little bit less certain. They will be facing an election in a couple of months. Depending on who wins that, I think the policies will be clear. But the broader point is that what the U.S. has done with these tariffs, it has essentially alienated its friends. It's making it harder for countries that have been steadfast allies and friends of the U.S. to continue to see U.S. as reliable, basically. And the only choice left for them is China. So this is a strategic win for China in some ways. I mean, President Trump is not making America great again. He's making China potentially great.
Wow. Vina, I heard the commentator Richard Quest describe Trump's actions as economic vandalism. Now, the U.S. elected him, Donald Trump. I get that. But the whole world will feel the effects here. If the U.S. falls into recession because of this, it's probably going to be everyone's problem. Looking beyond governments and corporations, though, how do you think that these tariffs will be felt by ordinary people all over the world?
Yeah, so for countries in the developing world, these tariffs come on top of cuts in U.S. aid, right? So the same place like Cambodia and Vietnam and others, they're also suffering from a lack of U.S. aid and other things that they had depended on for years. So obviously, cost of living will go up, inflation will go up, GDP growth will go down, employment will be impacted. So people will become poorer. That's basically the bottom line. In the US, I think the economy has been really strong. So fears of recession are growing, but we're not yet there, right? So, I mean, depending again on how other countries retaliate, US will potentially be okay if there is no retaliation, but that's a big if. And then again, it depends on kind of how quickly these things get resolved. If this lasts, then basically it'll be a self-inflicted harm. I mean, this is the dumbest trade war. I think the Wall Street Journal editorial called it that. I very much agree. I think most economists agree that this is the dumbest, the most unnecessary self-inflicted economic harm in a time when the world doesn't need it, right? I mean, Kevin, we just recovered from COVID. We have many other things to deal with, effects of climate change, disruptive technologies. There's enough problems in the world.
Right. We're on the brink of this AI revolution, which is going to upend everything.
Exactly.
And this is when we decide to do this? Go back to the 18th century?
Exactly. No, I mean, it is incredible how obviously one person and one leader can be so consequential and can essentially change the course of history.
It's history. We're living through history. I mean, the last time that free trade was as big a topic as it is now was like 30 years ago, when we were seeing these massive protests against the World Trade Organization and anti-globalization protests. I mean, I grew up in Vermont. That was a big part of the culture there.
Yes.
We think more free trade and more sort of opening up of markets for big U.S. corporations is actually hurting working people all over the world and in this country.
People have been protesting free trade for decades. It's not new. But now we're seeing it coming to an end. And now I know there's long been an appetite for a new economic order. But the question is this it? And will it be better or worse than what it's replacing?
That is a great question. And I also remember those protests in the 90s. I was young, and I think I was actually quite supportive of the people who sort of felt that trade needed to be more inclusive, that we were leaving too many people behind in this globalization, right?
Fair trade.
Exactly. Fair trade. I mean, I remember being part of discussions at the United Nations in the 90s and early 2000s about including more voices from developing countries in World Bank and IMF and obviously democratizing democratizing how we govern the world is absolutely necessary. But this is not the solution to all the problems of free trade and globalization. This is basically taking a baseball bat and destroying everything rather than reforming things and making them better. So now, from the ashes of all of this, something better could potentially come up, right? I mean, I'm optimistic. I sort of feel like as human beings, we can always create things. And even in chaos and destruction, people can focus on the positive.
Vina, when your optimistic take includes the term "from the ashes of all of this," I don't know how optimistic it is.
Well, you can tell. I mean, I grew up in Afghanistan. I didn't mention that during the Cold War. So I kind of have to be optimistic to make it through the day. But I mean, in all seriousness, though, we are living through history, as you mentioned, and we'll see what happens. I mean, things are uncertain, but the one thing that we can do is essentially, whether it's in our daily lives or in countries' lives, try to control the things that are within our power, right? So like basically we can't control President Trump. We can't control what happens next from Oval Office. But I'm sitting and speaking to you from Canada. What can we do here in Canada to essentially become more resilient, to be able to withstand this disruption and shocks? And how can we use the crisis to make the changes we wanted to make? You pointed out a number of things in the system didn't work. So maybe we can use the crisis to think of those solutions and to bring forward things for which there was no political will before, right? So maybe this, again, you're right, I'm trying to be optimistic,
Yeah.
But crisis also brings in an opportunity. That's bottom line.
That's right. Anyway, Vina, this was great. Thank you for coming on The Take and helping us make sense of all of this.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me.
And that's The Take. This is my last time guest hosting full time. I will be passing the mic to my friend and colleague, Natasha Del Toro, but I'm going to still be around, so don't worry. I'm not going anywhere. If you enjoyed today's episode, don't forget to give it a like so more people can find it. And I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Let me know what stood out or if there's anything you'd like us to dive deeper into next time. We will see you here tomorrow.